I'm the replacement for the coffee break. Well, I will start my presentation with a question. And the question is, what am I doing here? First, I'm French, and as a result, I speak somewhat peculiar English tinted with a heavy Gallic accent. Secondly, I'm not an economist, not at all. When I was at the high school, I hated mathematics, and anything beyond the equation of the first degree still remains a mystery for me. When I was a student, I tried to read Samuelson's Foundation of Economics Analysis, and I never went beyond the second chapter. And since I'm an adult, I tried my luck several times on the stock market, and I prefer not to tell you what happened to my money. So, basically, I'm an arts person. Secondly, I'm an historian. Thirdly, I'm a political scientist. And finally, I'm a Japanologist. My last published book is about Japanese manga, comics. So what could I add to the presentation of my excellent colleagues? So when I was asked to make a presentation at this symposium, frankly speaking, I was tempted to decline such an honor, but I had a second thought. After all, as far as I know, no economist predicted the strong crisis that engulfed Japanese economy in the 1990s after the bursting of the speculative bubble. The only books I've read that predicted what happened are one by Bill Emmott, a journalist, and another one by John Bronoff, more or less a sociologist. No economist, as far as I know, denounced the incredible unconsciousness of the banks that triggered the worldwide financial crisis in 2008. Well, okay, maybe some economists did, but in any case, nobody listened to them. And very few economists predicted 25 years ago that China would become the second economic power in the world. So I said to myself, there is no reason why I should fear to speak at an academic gathering about economic revitalization. Why not? So I'm an historian, and history taught several things to me. Among other things, that there are moments when a nation experiments what could be defined as an outburst of national energy. Of course, the very notion of national energy probably would make any economist smile in this belief, because national energy is not something that can be measured, so it's definitely not a scientific notion. However, even if national energy cannot be measured, its effects can be clearly seen in history. Here you have a few examples. So at times, some nations, here you have a few of them, have been able to success in some exceptional undertaking, something never seen before, and not to be repeated afterward. This undertaking is usually achieved at the price of unprecedented mobilization of efforts and resources, the acceptance of a lot of hardships, and often, but not always, some millions of lives. The best case today is certainly China. All these cases have one common point: the type of undertaking. There are mostly wars. But almost always, war has been preceded by a vigorous episode of economic modernization and growth, or concomitant with such economic growth. The nation which experiments what I consider to be an outburst of energy usually engages in an outright competition. For example, the best example possible, of course, is Japan's rebuilding after its defeat in the Second World War, with the goal of catching up with the West. So what does it take for a nation to experiment outbursts of national energy? First, you need human resources, young, abundant population growing through natural fertility or immigration, or preferably both of them. Second, you need frustration. But frustration alone is not enough. This frustration must be directed against a clearly identified adversary or enemy, and it must be accompanied by a clearly defined set of expectations, something worth to battle and something worth to make sacrifice for it. The horizon of expectation must not be too far away. The goal must be reachable, or at least seems reachable, and a degree of optimism is the rigor. You need sense of belonging. The most cohesive a nation is, and the most able it is to mobilize efficiently. You need a resolute leadership, and you need media. There is no mobilization without an efficient coverage of all the nation by the media. And since the national energy is based on emotion, the most emotional the media, the better. Clearly, the present-day crisis is not favorable to the mobilization of national energy in the developed countries. The present situation in many developed countries, which feel the impact of globalization, offers some basic similarity with war. What's happening today? Some newcomers, some new players, are trying to conquer part of the wealth and part of the powers of the old developed nations. Of course, the economists explain very convincingly that globalization is a win-win process. However, many people, I mean common folk, fear that they will be spoiled of their job, of their savings, and of their pensions. That's the basic reality. So, it's a kind of war, but this war is a defensive one. People are not asked to make efforts and sacrifices for gaining a better future, but only in the hope of not losing what they already have. This is not very stimulating. No leader today, in any developed country, I think, is able to give a clear vision of a bright future to the nation. And furthermore, the better seems more or less hopeless. I'm 63 years old. But among the few certainties that I still retain in my old age, there is one. When I'll die, the public debt will still be there. Unless the states, of course, do like many states did during almost all the history of mankind, that is, go bankrupt. But the economists explain us very convincingly that this kind of simplistic solution is just impossible today, and I believe them, of course, like most people do. Furthermore, the situation is extremely complicated. First, there is not a single enemy, but at least two. China on the one hand, and financial markets on the other hand. There are two enemies, but they are clearly not of the same nature. So how to battle them both at the same time. Furthermore, these two very different enemies are both faceless and ubiquitous. The developed nations need them even more than they fear them. We need the financial system, we need China, we need low-cost labor and huge market of China. So nobody can possibly figure how to cope with these two enemies. Well, this slide speaks for itself. If you want to mobilize any nation, you need several ingredients. Frustration and discontent, that's the basic ingredient. Optimism, self-confidence, and a sense of belonging. Of course, pressure of all kind and pure greed also works. You can make people make sacrifice by political pressure, of course. But there is a political cost. That's the political cost. Pictures are fresh from the French media. It happened this week in Brittany. And that's the price to pay, at least in France, for trying to raise taxes when people are definitely not ready to accept such kinds of sacrifice. I'm quite sure that the French government will backpedal, as it already did several times in the last few months. So, what is the best possible mix of the ingredients I just mentioned? If you have only frustration, the most destructive behavior will certainly happen. Because when the common folk consider that the only thing he still can do is to protest and to punish the bad guys and vote them out, quit them out as soon as possible, the price is political instability, leading to chaotic economic policies, like we witnessed in France, and the growth of extremist political parties like the Front National in France. For those who don't know what is the Front National, it's a far-rightist political party, and it could probably become the first party in France at the next European election next year. So, what a positive national energy can do for the revitalization of the developed nation. The best possible combination is when the all ingredients, frustration, optimism, self-confidence, plus sense of belonging are mustered into the collective psyche of one nation. In that case, you can hope that people will accept more effort and more sacrifices, more willingly, mean work more, earn less, pay more taxes, and don't do nothing. So the political power will be somewhat stabilized. People will be more ready to create new enterprises, look for new ideas, look for new way of becoming riches. So risk-taking and creativity will be stimulated. And possibly, people will make more babies, and the human resources will grow. So, enough for generalities. I have some matter for comparison about what I call national energy among the French and the Japanese youth. This is a big international poll that has been realized by a French well-known think tank, Foundation for Political Innovation, in 2 years in 2010, a huge undertaking poll in 25 countries, 1,000 young respondents from 15 till 25 years old in each country. For comparison, some old people have also been surveyed. And you can find the complete results of the poll in English here, but also in Japanese here. Well, 250 pages. But it's on free access on internet. So what we have with French and Japanese young people about frustration. So here you have the answer for Japan and France to the questions here, the average, and for the sake of comparison, Anglo-Saxon countries here, United Kingdom and United States, but also China, India, and Brazil. And if you want to know what national energy means, look at China, India, and Brazil. Well, frustration. The Japanese youth are the most frustrated among the 25 nations surveyed here. Well, when you have this small, here you see 25, or 80 seconds, it means rank 25 among 25. That's the last ranking, okay? So, the Japanese youth are the most frustrated in the world. But the French comes closely after. Interestingly enough, the French youth rank second in the world for satisfaction with their own life as a whole, whereas they score well under average on the two other questions. It means that the French youth are very satisfied with their own life in general, and of course, it's very comfortable for the French youth, and so I feel happy for them. But in my opinion, the satisfaction is not a good point here, because as far as the French national energy is concerned, because the people who are content with their own life are definitely not ready to mobilize. Optimism. Do you agree with the following statement? My future will be bright, is bright. The future of my country is bright, and I will have a good job in the future. Things are even worse. France and Japan monopolize the two last ranking, except for two questions. I mean, they rank 24th or 25th. Overall, the Japanese youth have a little bit more confidence in their countries than their French counterparts. Self-confidence. Self-confidence is not more promising. Once again, Japan holds the worst possible combination of the two answers among the 25 countries surveyed. But the French youth look hardly more confident in their ability to make any difference. So, frustration is high, optimism is extremely low, self-confidence is extremely low, and sense of belonging. As far as sense of belonging is concerned, maybe you think, and I did think, that the young Japanese would score better than in the previous three items. After all, the Japanese society has a strong reputation for being cohesive. But once again, the Japanese youth rank last on 4th of the 5 items, including I belong to the society in which I live, the French and the French and the Japanese don't feel that they belong to the society, and paying pension for the elder and so and so. Conclusion is quite clear and not very encouraging for France or Japan. According to this poll, the French and the Japanese youth alike display the worst possible combination of high level of frustration, pessimism, lack of self-confidence, and they don't have a strong sense of belonging to their respective national community. They display such a deadly combination to a degree that no other nation approaches, except one, the Mexican. But I remind you that Mexico is engaged in a quasi-civil war between authority and drug cartel. So, and on the other hand, the developing countries and the Anglo-Saxon countries are on the opposite side of the spectrum. They all display the positive combination of satisfaction, optimism, self-confidence, and the sense of belonging. But this is not to say that the situation is hopeless for France and Japan, not at all. First, a poll is just a poll. And international polls are very imperfect tool. The same question has very different meaning according to the culture and so and so. Let's just take an amusing example from the poll. The question is, sexual relationships should only be allowed within marriage. Do you agree or not? Of course, French disagree massively. Yeah. But surprisingly enough, the Japanese seems to agree massively. Well, I'll not comment about USA, Brazil, and so, but having stayed rather long time in Japan and being in everyday contact with Japanese students, I find the answer to the poll not exactly congruent with the practices of the young Japanese I know. Okay, in conclusion, I would be more optimistic about Japan than about France, for at least 4 reasons. The first one is the nature and structure of the political systems. According to me, the Japanese political system is much better than the French one at preserving a degree of stability within the worst possible crisis. The second factor, I think, is the role played by the mass media. The French mass media divide the nation structurally, whereas the Japanese mass media, tend more or less to unite somewhat the nation. That's a big difference. The third reason is a very dense network of concrete links between the people and groups in the Japanese society. And we don't have such a dense network of links at every level in France. And the last factor, I think, is the existence in Japan, in today's Japan, of 2 very concrete national tasks for the last 2 decades. The first one is the rebuilding of the regions devastated on March 11, 2011, of course, and the battle against the nuclear disaster in Fukushima. And the second is the organization of Olympic Games in Tokyo. Japan has 2 very concrete challenges to meet in face of the world with clear deadlines. And this could greatly bolster the national energy of Japan and help to revitalize the Japanese economy. And the French has, at present, not such a clearly defined national goals. Thank you, and sorry for replacing the coffee break. So,